you, Arthur, and thanks for having me today, and thanks to all of you for coming. We're at a defining moment in this debate about financial reform. It's been 2.5 years since the crisis started. It's been 9 months since President Obama first laid out a proposal for a comprehensive reform. It's been 3 months since the House of Representatives passed a strong bill. Now, this is an enormously complicated, consequential issue. We have to get it right. But we now know all we need to know, I think, about the choices ahead. We just need to decide whether we're going to act. So this afternoon, I wanted to make the case for reform to the business community, to the financial community, and to the broader American public. First argument for reform. The failures in our system were devastating. Now, when a conservative Republican president, George W. Bush, president with abiding faith in markets who proposed privatizing Social Security, is forced by a financial crisis to put Fannie and Freddie Mac into conservatorship. When a conservative Republican president is forced by failures of financial policy to ask Congress for $700 billion in authority to stabilize the financial system and to invest the taxpayers' money in banks, when a conservative Republican president is forced by a recession caused by financial failure to lend billions of dollars to our nation's two large automakers, now when a conservative Republican president is forced to do all that, and he was right to do it, there's something undeniably wrong with the economy. But financial reform is also about growth and innovation. It's about the interests of the American entrepreneur. It's about the engineer with a new patent and a new company. It's about the small business looking for capital. The test of whether a financial system works is not just whether it protects consumers and investors from predation and fraud. That is vital and it's necessary, but it is not sufficient. The test is also whether the financial system does a reasonable job of channeling savings to finance future innovation. Reform is not going to go away. If we don't get a strong bill now, here's what's going to happen. We're going to keep fighting for a strong bill. We're not going to move on to other things. We're going to keep working with those who want a strong bill enacted into law. But in the meantime, the rest of the world is going to move on without us. If we don't lead, others will. They'll move to protect their citizens and their businesses with rules that fit their needs. If we fail to act, we will lose the opportunity to set the global agenda and to lead the debate in shaping a level playing field on terms that play to our strengths. If we fail to act, American firms that operate globally will face a more balkanized global financial system with higher costs of doing business across multiple countries, with pockets of lower standards designed to attract the same type of risky behavior we're seeking to end. These reforms are essential to reduce the risk of future crises, and they will substantially reduce moral hazard. Investors would no longer sustain weak and risky institutions in the hope that the government would step in to protect them from loss. Our successors in the Federal Reserve and the Treasury will be able to allow firms to fail without the fear that the fire would spread to viable institutions. I do not believe there is a credible alternative to this basic structure. The normal bankruptcy regime we have for companies cannot work for banks because banks need funding to operate even as they are being wound down. Without funding, they would have to liquidate in a disorderly manner. In a crisis, there is no plausible private source of temporary financing like there is in debtor in possession financing for companies in bankruptcy. This recognition that markets failed and that the necessary solution involves reform, involves rules enforced by governments, is not a partisan or a political judgment. It's a conclusion reached by liberals and by conservatives. Listen to Richard Posner, a leader in the conservative Chicago school, wrote last year that, quote, "We need a more active and intelligent government to keep our model of a capitalist economy from running off the rails," unquote. Or consider Alan Greenspan, a skeptic of the benefits of regulation. If you look all in, you look at the expected earnings on the Fed's facilities, if you looked at the expected earnings on TARP and on the FDIC programs, and you compare those against the potential losses, which, as I said, are a fraction of what most people estimated, the cost of this crisis is likely to be the fiscal costs. This is an accounting sense, is much likely to be a fraction of the S&L crisis, which is a much less damaging crisis to the economy, much smaller, quaint in its complexity. Now, the cost of this crisis can't be captured by the accounting conventions of the budget. The costs are in the damage you saw to the economy, to businesses, to the revenue base of the country. And those accounting measures don't come close to capturing the basic cost of it. But still, the point is important, which is that if you look at the strategy that we adopted, building on what my predecessor accomplished, we have achieved a remarkable degree of stability at much lower cost, and have been much more effective in getting the government out of these emergency interventions much more quickly than most people anticipated. And the trauma caused by this crisis has been devastating, like nothing most Americans have any memory of. And at its core is this basic sense of deep injustice. And that moral failing of the system, the political opposition to doing things that look like they're going to benefit banks, even if they're necessary to save the system, is what leads most governments to screw up financial crises. I apologize for you saying it that way. Most governments, they confront the abyss and the crisis, and they look at the political costs of having to step in and do things that are going to look like they benefit banks. They find it politically repugnant and morally offensive, and so they stand back and they don't act, and that typically makes crises much worse, last longer, makes them cost much more, is much more unfair ultimately to the people that are the innocent victims of the crisis. And so the best thing you can do to look Americans in the eye and say, we're not going to put you in a position of facing this again, is to say, we're going to pass reforms that offer the prospect of limiting this kind of risk in the future. I think that's the only thing we can do that's responsible. It's the best thing we can do. It's a necessary thing to do. And it's not enough, as both of you said, it's not enough to tell people and remind people that it could have been dramatically worse. And you can't explain that. I mean, for most people, they haven't experienced anything like this. So how can you say to them with credibility, it could have been dramatically worse? And what comfort is it to them that it's going to cost, just for the TARP, less than $100 billion in a $14 trillion economy, rather than $500 billion when you have unemployment at 10% and the prospect still of a long period of adjustment and repair from this stuff you have.
Thank you to all of you for coming today, and join me in thanking Secretary Geithner.